It's the Underpowered Hour. On this week's show, we're joined by Land Rover luminary Jeff Aronson to talk all about the Queen's Land Rovers at the Concours de Lemons. And now, without further delay, here's the show. Welcome to the Underpowered Hour. I'm Steve Beres, mild-mannered television executive by day and Land Rover collector by night. You can find out more about our cars and what we're working on at theberescollection.com or follow us on Instagram at theberescollection. I'm joined, as always, by my good friend, Ike Goss.
Thank you to everyone joining us today. I am the single fuse wiring harness to Steven's 140 fuse harness. I am the simple but functional host of podcasting, Ike Goss. I own and operate Pangolin 4x4 in Springfield, Oregon, where we live and breathe Land Rovers. Check us out online on Facebook, Instagram at Pangolin 4x4. Let's get started.
All right, Ike, and special guest host, our very good friend and Land Rover legend, none other than Mr. Jeff Aronson. How are you, sir?
I am fine, Steve. And Ike, it's good to see you again. I haven't had the time like that since we had lunch together. And if we're going to be really pretentious, at the tap room of the Pebble Beach Golf Club.
That's right.
It's true.
Exactly.
It happened.
Exactly.
It was happening.
Exactly.
I shared a sandwich Lady in the Tramp style with Jeff Aronson, and it was something else. It's a memory I will cherish forever.
Just kind of met in the middle of that.
Well, so will I, because I believe we recreated the famous scene in the Blues Brothers where they show up at the pretentious restaurant in an effort to get their trumpeter back in the band.
Yeah, that's exactly what happened. But the hostess seated us in the furthest, most obscure corner of the restaurant so that newly arriving patrons wouldn't have to see us or look at us.
We were sequestered in a hidden corner. That's true. I fully expected a door would shut so that we were totally out of view.
Yeah. They erected some stanchions around you, and it's sequestered off. But well, speaking of where we all met up this past weekend, none other than the world famous Concours de Lemons. Is not a venue that normally any of the three of us are invited to, and especially not His Majesty's Land Rover. That is not the kind of a place where you would expect the muddy-tired, rustied and clattering Land Rover to be displayed. But this year, quite a different story. In fact, there was, one would even say, an invasion of classic Land Rovers at this year's Concours. And, I have to say, it was extremely well received, in my opinion. I think people were tickled. A few people were pissed off. That's going to happen. And anywhere we go,
there was that one Maserati guy that pitched a little bit of a
he
fist.
was bitching a little bit, but you know what? Who cares about that guy? It's a Maserati, whatever. It's not even a real. It's like a second class Ferrari. But yeah, that's where we all found ourselves. And so we thought, as we do after any good event, we always like to sit down and recap it with our good friend Jeff Aronson and just get the lay of the land. Let everybody who wasn't there know sort of how it was and what venues we were kicked out of and where we weren't allowed to go in the first place. And we had a pretty good time, though. I have to say, what an event! Holy fancy that thing was. I think I saw more paisley jackets and fancy hats than I had anywhere previously, outside of maybe a production of My Fair Lady. So it was
Did you happen to see the Lost and Found?
Oh no! Oh, we should have picked some. That is amazing. Yeah,
the Lost and Found. It was just they were sweeping up Rolexes just off the field and like Hermes bags, just a push broom. Pushing those things. It was crazy.
Yeah.
But amazing turnout for Land Rover this year at the Pebble Beach Concours. And if you know anything about Monterey Car Week, that is not the only event. of the week. There was several other events, some of which we were able to get to, some of which we couldn't. But, in the 4 days we were there, I think we went to like 8 different events, at least Jenna and I did. And there were Land Rovers at each and every one. So from the first day, Thursday, they had the tour, which is, many of the vehicles that are featured in the concourse. They do a 60-mile drive up the coast there, the Pacific Coast Highway, across the Bixby Bridge, which is very iconic. And they do a turnaround and come back. And so you've got, modern supercars and like chitty chitty bang bang steam cars, on the same road at the same time. And it's really neat to see such a diversity of automobile and transportation history. And so Land Rover fielded 4 vehicles on the tour. And so Jenna and Liza and myself, Mr. Beres hadn't arrived yet. We took that opportunity to go along on the tour. Jenna and Liza were driving the Queen's 1954 Series 1 review vehicle, which is the sort of claret color, has the fancy hubcaps and the review platform. Pretty neat. And they were following us in an earlier, no, I think actually the same year, also a 54 Land Rover, which had some really neat features, a really pretty neat truck. And Mr. Bishop and Mr. Dimbleby and Damo were all in that vehicle taking photos and leading the pack. But it was great. It was great. We had a nice little ramble up the Pacific Coast Highway. Only a few small issues with the old cars who have mostly been sequestered away in museums in various parts of the world. So it was just cool to see them bring all those together and do the tour with those cars. I'm not sure Jeff was there yet and Steven hadn't arrived yet, but that was definitely a cool event. And one of the cooler events of the weekend, if you get the chance, it's pretty neat. They line up all the cars real early in the morning and you can walk through and see, I would say, a vast majority of the cars that are going to be displayed at the concourse. At the morning of the tour, you can walk through and see them all for free, no charge. It costs several $100s to get into the concourse, but
nearly $600.
You can see them all on Thursday running and driving. And, people did avail themselves of that. There would, I would say, thousands of people there early in the morning to watch the tour take off, as well as people stationed along the route, the full 60 miles, I would say there were people at every turn taking pictures and cheering on all the old cars. So that was cool to see, and the amount of enthusiasm for not only just automotive, history and transportation history, but also just, seeing people cheer for the plucky Land Rovers that don't belong there. That was pretty cool too. But, in the end, I think they acquitted themselves very well.
Yeah. What did you think, Jeff? Have you ever been to Pebble Beach before, Mr. Aronson? Was this your first time?
No, I had never been to Pebble Beach. I had certainly knew of it as one of the world's premier concours events, but also I am a Triumph sports car aficionado, MGs, and my other automotive love obviously is Land Rovers. So those have not necessarily been featured vehicles at the event at all. So it has just always been kind of a dream. This year, the impetus for me was the announcement of the Royal Rovers showing up at the event. And a number of things struck me about this. One is, obviously, this is the first time what today we call an SUV has been present at the concours. It has just never been there before. This was quite a breakthrough. And secondly, the thing that struck was that it truly was an exhibit, not a competition in terms of Land Rover's participation. So they were there at a staggeringly perfect waterfront site at the edge of the concours grounds. They were there just to show the vehicles. And there were no ropes around them. There were no stanchions. There were some individuals who looked like they could stop you if you intended to drive off with one.
There were attack dogs.
You could really get up close with it. Yeah. And it was fun to see Land Rover owners who were there for obviously other reasons necessarily, wander to the event and just gasp in amazement that these vehicles were here. I have to commend Jaguar Land Rover and Land Rover Classic out of the UK and Jaguar Land Rover here in the US for pulling this off and for actually making it a part of the day of the Concours de Lemons. It was remarkable and very, very positively received.
Oh, absolutely.
You were talking about the drive you took, Ike, on Thursday. I didn't get into Monterey until that afternoon, just in time, though, to hear Mike Bishop from Land Rover Classic actually give a presentation along with Paul Barrett, who I guess is the head of Land Rover Classic, and Nick Wilson, the marketing and PR person for that division, discuss what it took for them to actually round up these Land Rovers and, more importantly, find their history. Mike Bishop did an outstanding archival job of digging through files that he had access to in the UK at the British Motor Heritage Museum, as well as his own Australian-based research to come up with the history of these vehicles, and each was brilliantly described both in print and on huge screens at his presentation as to proof that with signed order forms and some copies of letters to the royal family indicating Rover's desire to help meet their request. It was a remarkable thing to see in print and on a screen. I commend them for doing all that archival research.
It's so cool. It's so cool. And I mean, you know, some of these cars, you know, Nick Wilson and I had the distinct pleasure of driving and then shortly, for a short while, pushing the Queen's 110, which is, you know, a car that she had at Balmoral, which she's been photographed with hundreds of times. I mean, I have, you know, some of my favorite photos of Queen Elizabeth and a Land Rover are with that Land Rover. And, you know, both Nick and I, as we were sort of driving that morning, had sort of said, like, yeah, a lot of our favorite photos with her are with this car. And it's just what a neat thing to be driving with it. But all of the research and all of the photos and everything that, you know, between Nick Dimbleby and Mike Bishop and the rest of the team there at Classics were able to gather around these cars and, you know, have obviously on hand there displayed with them. And then, of course, part of Mike's presentation. Yeah, super cool. So you're right. It's more than just, you know, sort of here's the car, it's sitting out on the lawn. It really was it was an experience. It was a full, you know, sort of education into each one of these cars for anyone who was willing. And, you know, to have, you know, Mike Bishop, Mr. Land Rover himself there, Mr. Land Rover III himself there on hand here in the U.S. to talk about any of these cars, to have, you know, also the team from Land Rover Classics there to, you know, keep the cars running and all of that. And, you know, Land Rover's Royal Liaison, the whole team was there. Really, really fantastic. I mean, you know, it's this huge investment from JLR to bring these cars over, to bring all those people over, to set up everything. It's just really fantastic. You know, what a great thing.
The other thing I want to mention is that at least one of these cars was in progress. You know, it was in the midst of being refurbished for this event up until like a week before the event actually happened. And it takes several days to get from, you know, to ship it in and get it all set up. So, you know, the effort that some folks went to bring that car there were nothing short of Herculean. You know, a lot of overnight shipments of parts and discussions of you know what to use and what is correct in various locations. But, you know, to take that particular vehicle, which I think is a 54 86 inch, from essentially, you know, no motor down to the chassis, you know, full repaint, full interior, you know, engine, you know, wiring, et cetera, to do all that in such a short period of time was pretty impressive. And then having driven only like 2 miles to do like a 60-mile tour with all these other world-class, you know, it was pretty impressive to see that.
And if you haven't seen any of these, you know, any of this, great places to go check it out. Of course, Nick Dibbleby's Instagram feed is always, it should be a daily visit for anyone who isn't doing that already. Quick aside on that, while we were there, as you know from listening to the show, anybody who does, Nick Dimbleby has been under constant pressure to purchase a Freelander from me. And he put a bid in on a Freelander, very cheap Freelander that he'd found in the UK, 800 quid, and went to sleep thinking there's no way. Obviously, he's going to get outbid. You know, it was the middle of the day there in the UK. It was the evening time here. So I woke up He was the proud owner of a Freelander. And if you look at his Instagram here over the last couple of days, he in fact did go and pick it up, and he is in fact a new owner of a Freelander. So
this is perhaps the most tragic news of the weekend. It's Nick Dimbleby's ownership of a Freelander has finally been realized.
So there's great concourse photos there, and also Freelander photos there, and then of course Land Rover Classics, also Nick's photos, some fantastic photos, and probably my absolute favorite photo of Liza and
maybe
Jenna.
some Damo photos. Let's give Damo some credit.
And Nick, and my favorite photo of Liza and Jenna driving the Queen's Review car. That would be from the car in front, straight on as they go over the bridge. Fantastic, and a classic Nick Dimbleby frozen, motion shot of them crossing that bridge as well. So cool. I mean, what an incredible, really special weekend. It was very cool.
So I want to mention some of the other events that happened over the weekend. We went and visited the Concours de Lemons, which is sort of an antithetical car show that happens during the same week. So as fancy and as pretentious as the Pebble Beach Concours is, this particular event is in opposition to that. So all the worst cars are there. All the, rusty, clapped out, most terrible, ugliest, flashiest, gaudiest, grossest cars are brought onto I think it's a local park. They bring them out.
It's the front lawn of the City Hall, actually.
Front lawn of the City Hall. And so the awards are worst in show, most likely to catch fire, and most likely to result in a lawsuit.
Yeah.
And so what would you say? There was maybe 100 cars that they brought out for that event?
I think that's about right. I think, it's about that. And there were some truly, I mean, some of them you could even say border on sculpture. More than
art car.
That they were more that than they were actual vehicles. I was pleasantly surprised that there was in fact a Land Rover there.
There was a Land Rover there. I was going to mention that. Yeah, it was in the British section, and it had an AstroTurf interior, no roof. Is a Series 3 North American spec car, and I believe it did win some sort of award, People's Choice or Judge's Choice or what have you, but it was pretty great. In addition, there were barn find cars complete with the possums they were found with. There were cars so rusty you could see through the sides of them. Incredibly dangerous cars that predated any sort of safety legislation on the roadway.
That's right.
There was Swedish cars. There was French cars. Of course, French cars were well represented at the Concours de Lemons. And there was a lot of crazy characters. There was pirates. There was people dressed up as various things. There were dogs dressed up as various things. There were dogs in cars. There was cars that shot flames, that cooked meats of various types. And one of the best things about this event is if you're a participant, you can bribe the judges. So you can give them money or alcohol or spare parts or tools or whatever to help sway them your way.
Yeah.
So it was kind of fun to see that, just sort of a thumb on the nose of the Pebble Beach event, but it was neat. It was a neat show.
You were very lucky, Ike. You're very lucky to have been able to go there. It is one of these touring events, happens at many different locations, and I believe doesn't Hagerty own the Concours de Lemons now? I think they did. Somebody bought it to actually produce more of them. I think of it as just a brilliant way to recognize that automotive love and enthusiasm does not need to have shiny paint and expensively restored vehicles in order to show it. I think that they have done a superb job of democratizing automotive enthusiasm in every form. I believe for their races, if I'm correct, there's actually a dollar limit that you're not allowed to spend more than. And it's quite low. It's several $100.
I've heard that. Yeah. If push comes to shove and people are disappointed with how much they think that you've spent on your car, I believe there was, or maybe is, a rule that you have to if people are complaining, you have to be willing to sell your car for that limit, which I think is like $500 or something. Rarely enforced,
$500.
But if push comes to shove, and you show up with some sort of brand new motor and a really fancy expensive build, you have to be willing to sell it for $500.
Yeah, we're lucky. Jenna had a conversation with Alan Gilbreth, who is the founder of the Concours de Lemons, and he's going to join us on the show at some point in the future. Yeah, we're going to get that scheduled, and seems like a really fun guy. I'm very interested in finding out more about where that event came from and stuff, because it's definitely more our speed for sure. I think then
it's got a fun vibe to it. People are having a good time. There's definitely some fun being had. That's not to say there's not fun with the fancy dress up people at Pebble Beach. Yep. There sure is, but it's just a different thing to see. And then we also went to the vintage races, the historic races at Laguna Seca. So we went out there, and guess what? We saw more Land Rovers there. There was a Camel Trophy 110 just in the parking lot. It was like a genuine Camel Trophy 110. That was pretty cool. And then they had an off-road sort of setup with off-road vehicles in the infield area of the pits, and they had a classic Range Rover sitting alongside a classic Land Cruiser and a classic Jeep and so on and so forth. So there was several Land Rovers there in and about the historic races, which were also cool and also exhibited a real diversity of automotive history, racing history in this case. So they had what they called the ragtime racers, 100-year-old cars that were driving around the circuit. And then, of course, newer, fancier cars, electric race cars, fancy vintage Indy cars, all these sorts of things. But our good friends at JLR also brought something to run around the course. They brought the prototype D-Type Jaguar. Yep. And they took it out to Laguna Seca to do a couple of laps there. And that thing, it sure is really cool. And Paul Barrett was speaking about that when Michael Bishop was also doing his talk on the Royal Land Rovers. They brought that over for the event. And I just want to give a shout out to Jock, who is the guy who takes care of the D-Type at JLR. Right. That guy was great. Not only was he very knowledgeable and had done a careful job working on that car and with that car, they brought him to drive it onto the concourse lawn. And he's just a regular guy, t-shirt and shorts, and everybody else is kind of dressed up a little bit for the concourse, and he's just like t-shirt, shorts, ball cap, and he's driving this like $12 million car onto the lawn.
It's amazing.
It was great.
He also drove the D-Type race car that they had brought, the Jaguar D-Type, and luckily for me, I happened to jump in to one of the Royal Review Rovers at the end of the event as it was being brought to the transport area of the huge parking lot areas where all the vehicles that were going to be loaded on to trucks were brought. He was behind us in the D-Type and listening to how carefully he had to keep that engine at higher rev, even though we were basically stop and go, so that the plugs didn't foul. Right. What a majestic sound that vehicle made. It was glorious. And he was a great guy. I agree with you. Nice to have salt of the earth, real car guys with these things.
Yeah, super nice guy. And I was thankful he let me sit in that and make some motor noises. It was pretty cool. That thing is a really special vehicle. So it was neat to see that, and that was cool that they brought that out in addition to the Land Rovers, especially considering, how much they're pushing Jaguar, which is not really terribly much right now, that they would go to the effort and expense of bringing that car is pretty cool.
Well, and it's funny because he also mentioned that, and this is, I can't even imagine this, but apparently if the car idles for too long because of the flow, the amount of fuel that flows through the carburetors, they can freeze because of how quickly the atomized fuel runs through. I mean, the engine is incredibly hot, right? So on one side, it's overheating. On the other side, it's freezing. The plugs are fouling if it's not burning hot. I mean, it's just like, it is incredible. But man, what a beautiful car. And another example of like wonderful Land Rover Jaguar Classics folks that came over to take care of these cars and are so knowledgeable and so, warm and open and more than willing to chat. And
Yeah, Tony and Jono
Yep.
also deserve a shout out. Those guys were super helpful in keeping the cars going, not only going, but looking really
Yeah.
nice. And they were super fun to talk to and just awesome people.
they really
all
were,
around.
really were.
Did you guys see the Everati and Windsor Classic? I know, so there was a vendor area. That's where the press tent was. You could buy lots of Pebble Beach paraphernalia. I just want to sort of elevate myself above you in the spirit of the event. There was a vendor there who had beautiful lambskin driving jackets, zip-up driving jackets. And even though he knew just by looking at me that a sale wasn't imminent, he let me try one on. And he was very tolerant of it. The price was about $3,300 for one coat. And I let him know that I had actually purchased the shell of my 109 for less.
Right.
6 years ago now.
That sounds about right. Yeah.
But the jackets were remarkably beautifully made and so on. But he was very gracious about it. At any rate, across from him, Ike, you and I saw a company from the UK called Windsor Classics.
We
did. Remember that one, Ike?
Yes, I do. I spoke with that gentleman a little bit about his offerings. That's one of the things I was kind of surprised to see was, some vendors and there weren't that many vendors, to be fair. There was very few vendors overall, which I think, they try to limit the amount of sales and vending and that sort of thing to the auctions primarily.
Right.
But there were two different entities selling vintage Land Rovers. One was the Windsor Classics folks, which was more of like a, standard Land Rover, standard engine, etc. And then there was the Everati folks who were selling a electrically converted, short wheelbase soft top Land Rover.
Yeah. Those weren't the folks that were at Greek Peak, right? That was a different gentleman, right?
I believe
that was a different company.
Different company, but same.
Steve, that was
same electric conversion.
I don't think they used the same motor. At Greek Peak, it was an outfit called Whittam Engineering from New Jersey, an expat.
That's
now
true.
Based in New Jersey, and he used an electrogenics motor and drive assembly. This Everati apparently is a different entity. They let me drive the Everati a short distance. And I must say, by leaving the entire suspension as Land Rover created it in 1958, it still gave you that serious feel as you went down an otherwise smooth road. It was certainly tightly put together. It was pleasant. It was awkward in a way to have a long gear shift that essentially had 3 positions: neutral, forward, reverse. But a very comfortable ride. The part that struck me, though, is we were driving along with the sales guide there, a fellow named William Morse, who noted that we couldn't go very far because he only had 17% of his power left in the battery. So he'd have to come back to plug it in.
Mm-hmm.
And while we've all stared at if we have a working gas gauge, we've stared at our gas gauges, and we know intrinsically how far the car can and cannot go based on the odometer. But this was just a reminder that, these conversions are clever and perhaps more debatable, but more ecologically viable. On the other hand, they don't have much range. And if you like to take your Land Rover on some longest drives, Ike, I know you do. Steve, I know you do. And I do. I do not want to be searching for an electric plug every 80 to 100 miles.
Yeah, I mean, that is the problem with that type of conversion, right? Is that, even my modern F-150 with 350 miles of range, which is plenty, but to do a long, let's say Death Valley trip, it's not really possible yet, right? Because we could get out into Death Valley and then we would need to lay out a solar mat for a week so that we could recharge the truck to then be be able to continue back, which, honestly is probably something like what we'll do in the future. Either we'll take hydrogen with us, we will do some type of long-term solar, we'll do something. We're just not quite at the energy density that we need to yet. We need the electric jerry can, and we just don't quite have that yet, right? So for now, I think the next step is probably a hybrid of a traditional fuel with an electric option, so we can make that engine significantly more efficient. We can take advantage of the electric torque and all that stuff we get from the electric system, but we can still take advantage of the range of an energy dense portable fuel. It's one of those things. It is pretty funny, and we were talking the other day, total non sequitur, about towing with the electric vehicles as well, which is another thing that we do with our Land Rovers. Towing is a big thing, and that's obviously something where electric vehicles kind of fall short, right? Towing is a real challenge. And we saw the earlier this year, or sort of late last year, we saw the first sort of motorhome or tow behind trailers with power in the axles, so a powered trailer, so that you're not getting any drain on the car from the trailer. And just a week or so ago, the first flatbed trailer with its own batteries, so that you can now, it's just starting to come out where they're using that same axle. It's a particular trailer axle, but someone has now built a flatbed trailer around that powered axle, so that electric vehicles can tow with this flatbed trailer and not realize any range dip. So, and it's interesting. I don't know. You've got this battery that when it's on your flatbed, you're not doing anything with it. So it would be interesting to see, like, well, maybe is there a way to take that battery out and use it for something else when it's not being used on my trailer? I don't know that I want it just sitting there for the 90% of the time I'm not using a trailer, but it is interesting because I think with any of those vehicles, that's something we got to figure out, is how do we move that extra electricity that we're going to need around with us until we need it. So, but yeah, I think it's neat. I think those conversions are cool. Those kind of things are really cool. Yeah, they're cool.
But it was really nice to see them in that area, because beside them was I think Infinity financed this. It brought over about a dozen Japanese cars, some that we never saw, and some that were back in the days when, like, Nissan was Datsun.
Oh, cool.
So they had a couple of the sports cars there. They had some K cars there, the small ones. It was fun to see them. I admit that.
Nice.
Yeah. That was a cool display. They had the Mitsubishi Evo rally truck. They had the Toyota FJ55. They had several smaller Japanese cars. It was pretty neat to see that, and I think the diversity of the vehicles that show up to Monterey Car Week is pretty incredible. That is one thing. It doesn't matter what kind of car you like, it'll be there.
Yeah,
and probably more than one.
As an aside to that, I stayed at a little for Carmel, inexpensive.
It was only $10,000 an evening.
And just driving up and down the street, even in the parking lot of that particular hotel, there was a Alfa Duetta, Porsche Speedster. There were a couple of older Range Rovers, L322s, and so on. But all along the streets were this amazing collection of cars, either parked on the side of the road or zipping up and down the main streets in Carmel. I happened to have a dinner one night with Tim McCullough, the former brand vice president at Jaguar Land Rover, who's also a judge at Pebble Beach.
Wow.
So we had dinner one night, and she reassured me, as someone who has been participating both as an entrant and as a judge at the Pebble Beach event for years, that these cars disappear the moment that the Monterey Car Week is over. You never see them again until the following week.
Yeah.
My working assumption was how fascinating to actually be able to use these cars and see them every day, and what a treat that is from New England rust buckets and the like. But no, she said, no, you won't see them again until the following year.
Interesting.
Yeah. And one of those cars that we haven't talked about yet is the 109 that was on the lawn at the concourse.
Oh, what a treat.
That was not part of Land Rover's display. So that I thought was really interesting. There hasn't really been a Land Rover at Pebble Beach since the 60s. They brought that to one that we discussed previously on the program. The factory brought an 88 wagon that they kind of, in a way, tongue-in-cheek, sort of made fancy by putting some lanterns on the front and some wicker work on the side and custom paint and interior. And so since then, there really haven't been any Land Rovers. But this year, there were not only the Land Rovers that JLR brought that were related to the Queen, then another enthusiast who is I guess a diehard Pebble Beach regular. Yep. They brought their Duesenberg, and then they also brought this 109 that the owner's deceased husband had purchased new.
Yeah.
And he had extensively had it modified and customized for trips to Africa in the 60s. And that thing was incredible. Not only was it like very low mileage and fairly original, but it just had every possible option that you could buy from the factory. And that was one interesting feature of it. And then the other interesting feature is it was highly customized both at the factory and afterwards for these trips. So it had a ton of period travel accessories and travel gear, customized luggage, 3 fuel tanks, diesel engine, just all these crazy things, winch covers and custom interior with elephant hide seats with leather reinforcements on the corners, a big folding picnic table, gun racks, hatches in the roof, the list goes on. Really just, every accessory kind of reminded me a little bit of Herbert Zipkin's Land Rover that he customized, sort of another famous expedition vehicle. But I think most of this work was done by Land Rover at the factory, at least according to the owner. We'll have to do some research on this one. It was a special car. It only had like 5,000 original miles. And, I think it would probably be more famous or more well-known if it had been out and about. But they said they really just kept it in their collection, and they just on a lark brought it to the event this year. And it just happened to be an event that Land Rover was heavily involved in. So that was cool to see that truck too.
Yeah. It's owned by a gentleman named Robert Lee, who started an outfit called Hunting World, which for a while certainly had publication as well.
Of course. Yeah.
Apparently it's based in Reno, and it was purchased so that he could travel and in some relative comfort. It was, am I correct? I believe it said it was a 62.
Yeah, 62, and I believe his wife owns it now, Anne Marie. But
I believe that was it.
And there was a lot of correspondence between that they brought with them from the Land Rover company and the original owner.
Yes,
describing the customizations and so forth, as well as the build sheet, which had all the factory options, as well as some notes about some of the custom work that they had done to it.
And will look to be some sort of mix between a premise stove and a samovar in the back.
Yes.
For apparently making tea on the fly.
Yeah, they had a crazy like water canister on each side for the rear passengers, as well as like a coffee dispenser sort of thing. So you could have tea and water or coffee and water on each side. You didn't have to reach across. So it was pretty elaborately done, but what a neat thing, that thing was pretty incredible.
Agreed.
So if you get the opportunity to go to Monterey Car Week like we did, I highly suggest you go.
Yeah.
It was fantastic, and there may not be as many Land Rovers in the future as there were this year, but certainly if you like anything automotive, definitely take the time to go down there and see it. There's something for really everybody.
Yeah, no, there really is. And no, it was fantastic. So Jeff, favorite Land Rover of the event to wrap up for today. What did you think? If you had to pick one of those cars, what was your favorite?
Well, I think I have to pick two, Steve.
That's fine.
I'm going to cheat.
We'll allow that.
Following what seems to be a trend in automotive marketing, JLR rented a structure which became the Range Rover House. But in front of it was an absolutely stunning, and I want to believe a very early build or an early prototype, like you may know better than me.
It's an A suffix,
of a two-door Range Rover Classic.
Yeah.
And that was just stunning to see. And the other is the Royal Review Rover. I had seen them only in photos, I had never actually been around one. And the moment that the owner declined the offer from Mike Bishop to ride along with him for the parade presentation at that Sunday event, I hip checked the owner out of the way and announced that I would ride in the front seat with Mike Bishop. And I need to highlight this for myself because my mother was born and raised in England and emigrated to the U.S. as a bride, if you will, and believed that the royal family stood somewhere near the Holy Trinity, perhaps even equal with it. Our house was filled with coronation souvenirs and plates, etc. And I grew up having to suffer tea time. So to ride in it and to look to the heavens and realize that my mother was finally approving of something that I had done and accomplished was a major moment. It took decades, but I'm quite confident that was her feeling.
Well done. Well done, sir. Well done. And what about non-Land Rover car? What was your favorite non-Land Rover?
There was at the Everati exhibit, there was a Mercedes Pagoda convertible, which I think is one of the most beautiful two-seater cars ever designed and ever created. And I would rue the loss of the engine, and the conversion, but the bodywork was absolutely stunning at it. I otherwise just saw more Lamborghinis, Maseratis, and classic Ferraris than I have ever seen at one place in my lifetime. And it reminded me that there was a time when automotive design was meant to elicit a positive, yearning response from everyone who saw the vehicle, as opposed to now, where we just don't seem to be able to create very many really stunning turn your head vehicles. And that's what this weekend was to me. It was just one after the other of particularly the Italian classics.
Absolutely. No, that's true. We've definitely moved in a different direction, let's say, from the cars of that time. They are
fair enough.
Yeah, they are absolutely gorgeous. What about you, Ikers? What's your favorite Land Rover that was there?
You know, I like the Expedition 109. That thing had a cool history, and it was something you don't really see very often, is the custom work from the factory, and had, I would say, almost all of its original accessories, and it really took a lot of looking to notice all the, changes from standard. Somebody had spent just a ton of time and effort, realizing a vision that was very specific to that car, and I thought it was unique for that reason. So that was a cool one to see and unexpected,
for sure.
And plus, as far as vehicles that were at the show, I had been around the other cars for several days at that point. So I got to crawl all over those and look at all the special differences, and those were exceptional and super, super fun too. But that 109 was a neat one and a real treat. And then as far as non-Land Rover vehicles, there was a 1914 Packard that had Indiana plates on it. That was just exceptionally cool. Original paint, all of its original accessories, and the owner was super cool, and he drove it on the tour. So, that car is 110 years old, and it's driving on the road with all these modern cars. That was a super, super cool car.
It really was. It really is an amazing experience. And it was for me, I mean, again, I had the distinct pleasure of riding around with Nick in the Queen's 110, a car that she drove a lot at Balmoral, so much so that there's little corgi scratches in the linoleum in the back of the car. A custom sort of green leather interior in the car, even the special radio, the military band radio, so that if she needed to get a hold of somebody back at the castle, she could pick it up and radio back for, I don't know, more tea or whatever she needed. And she's just so heavily photographed in that car in the age she was when she looked exactly like my grandmother. And so it's just sort of it was very special. And, Nick and I started celebrating just a little bit too soon. It was totally fine. Quick push. I will say I'm of the lucky few who've been able to push one of the Queen's Land Rovers onto the lawn at Pebble Beach. So that certainly was a great experience. I enjoyed that.
I actually want to know exactly what was wrong with it, and my suspicion is that the emergency coil that was
Yes.
fitted from the Jaguar was a ballasted coil, and they had a ballast resistor which overheated the coil. I think
was
that was
100% an overheated coil. That's true, but that was all right. That was super fun, and I think my favorite car there. I don't know. There were so many great ones. I love that weird little wedge car from the Peterson Automotive Museum. That it's like a perfect black. I still don't know how you get into it.
Oh yeah,
it's been in the basement of the Peterson forever.
Mies van der Rohe or something like that.
It's those the wedge car exhibit was pretty fun. It was a whole,
one of those wedge cars, if you didn't hear, burned to the ground. The Ford Probe prototype wedge car, the red one, that one burned in the transport trailer shortly after the event.
What?
So it is no more.
Oh, that was the fire.
Oh my God.
Wow.
Really? Oh my God. Wow. I didn't hear about that.
A little drama to the weekend.
I didn't know it was that car.
Wow.
Right? It was.
And then I also, I have to say, the shortened Volkswagen van that had the flamethrower at the back that was roasting hot dogs at the Concours de Lemons, that might have been my favorite car of the weekend. That little guy, a tattoo shop down in San Diego's official vehicle. That thing was pretty awesome. I really like that. I would have eaten one.
And shout out to that tiny Soilito truck that someone brought, the 55 Soilito. Yeah. That thing was insanely cool. I definitely want to find one of those. That thing was amazing.
Yeah. Well, and that's about all the time we have today. But before we go, we absolutely have to thank all of our good friends at Jaguar Land Rover. Joe Everhart, Joe Staubel, Stewart, Jeffrey Ahuden, the whole gang there, everyone involved with putting that event together. Absolutely incredible. And then, of course, everyone from, the team in the UK, not the least of which Michael Bishop and Mr. Land Rover himself, and all the work that went in finding these cars, convincing the owners of these cars to quickly restore them and send them to Pebble Beach and send them to Range Rover House, and everything that went, into that. And then just generally to Jaguar Land Rover for inviting us in to the inner sanctum and letting us play around with these cars and spend time with them. And, it was great to see Nick Dimbleby and the gang and hang out and everything. And thanks to you, Mr. Aronson, for again spending some time with us, recapping this great event. It's always great to chat with you.
Well, thank you very much, Steve. There will be a feature story on the Royal Rovers and their presence in the November issue of Rovers magazine. The latest issue, the fall issue, will be at the printer very shortly, and so will be the November issue. So we'll have some fabulous interviews with some of the folks who really made all this happen.
Fantastic.
Fantastic.
All right. Well, with that, if you haven't headed on over to the old YouTube, check it out. There's some great Jeff Aronson content on there. If you're interested in seeing Mr. Aronson moderate or marshal the old RTV, there's some great content there on that, both from this past weekend's Minnesota trip, where we've got some links up there to our good friend Joe at the Lost Cause Ranch, who video documented the entire challenge, if you will, the Anarch Cup challenge that Jenna and Liza so expertly crafted for the Minnesota challenge, if you will. Joe was there and got some great video of that. So head on over to his channel, Lost Cause Ranch, to check that out. He did a great job of that, and it looks like he had a great time there as well. And our long storied trailer rewiring video, the first part of that is up on our YouTube. So head on over and check that out. Or, of course, if you're interested in any of the West Coast Anarcha events and watching, if you haven't seen the Bruce Fowler, Bob Steele RTV video, that is one for the history books, to say the least. So head on over and check that out. And lots of pictures up on the Instagram from this past weekend's Concours de Lemons. Lots of great content also up on Liza and Jenna's Instagrams around the Queen cars and all that sort of business. And like I said, we're going to have Liza and Jenna on next week, talking specifically about what it's like driving those old cars and what that experience was like. And I believe both Jenna and Liza licked a good portion of each one of those cars just to really get the full feeling and infuse themselves with some Queen energy there. So,
well, that's weird.
It's all right though. That's what you got to do. Well, Mr. Aronson, thank you very much. Good luck out there on the island, and we'll hopefully talk to you again very soon.
I would love that. Thank you very much, Steve. And thank you, Ike.
Take it easy. See you guys on the trail.
The Underpowered Hour is produced by Liza Beres, Ike Goss, and me, Steve Beres. Pavel Svardov composed and performed our theme music. Consider supporting the show on Patreon, and if you already do, thank you. Your support makes the show possible. For even more, check out our Instagram or Facebook.